A little fair weather cloud and very pleasant temperatures peaking at 20 or 21. For northeast England, it'll be a touch breezy along the North Sea coast where it'll be cooler, but inland away from that cooling wind it will feel warm in the sunshine. Some cloud lingering along windward coast for Glasgow and southern Scotland, but most places staying dry with sunny spells through the afternoon. Temperatures peaking at a respectable 18 Celsius. Northern Ireland will also have a sunny afternoon, although with some cloud about it'll be breezy too, but with winds coming from the south, it will feel warm. Staying dry this evening, but gradually turning cloudier in the west and rain creeping towards Northern Ireland. That's how it's shaping up.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome. This is Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes, on telly, DAB and online. What a show we've got lined up for you today. Diversity drives in school curriculums, with the National Education Union saying we should teach kids Black history and social justice. Also, what needs to be done to boost women's football. But first, it's the news with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Darren. It's 1 minute past 2. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Russia has banned the Prime Minister, Foreign Secretary and Defence Secretary from entering the country. Russia's Foreign Ministry announced that Boris Johnson, Liz Truss and Ben Wallace are all barred, along with 10 other British government members and politicians. They say unprecedented hostile action by the British government, particularly sanctions against senior Russian officials, is the reason behind the move, with further names to be added later. Fresh Russian missile strikes have hit the outskirts of the Ukrainian capital Kyiv, and explosions have been heard in the western city of Lviv. Ukraine officials also say fighting is continuing in the southern besieged city of Mariupol. It comes as the country's president, Volodymyr Zelensky, says around 3,000 of his troops have been killed since the beginning of Russia's invasion. Efforts are underway to evacuate Ukrainian civilians through 9 humanitarian corridors today. A Ukrainian defense official says Russia's navy is continuing to block the port in Mariupol.
A full-scale armed aggression of the Russian Federation against our state is going on. In the waters of the Sea of Azov, an enemy ship grouping continues to carry out tasks to block the port of Mariupol. Due to the presence of Russian warships armed with sea-launched cruise missiles in the Black Sea, there's an increased threat.
The Home Secretary says other countries could follow the UK's Rwanda asylum plan, as it was confirmed that 6,000 people have crossed the channel so far this year. Priti Patel made the comment despite reports of a civil service backlash over the reforms. The United Nations Refugee Agency has warned the plans are in breach of international law. Earlier, the Ministry of Defence confirmed 181 migrants crossed to the UK on 6 boats yesterday. Dr. Greg Mills, a former strategic advisor to the president of Rwanda, says the government's plans are concerning.
Well, I think it's a highly transactional response to the refugee crisis in the UK, and essentially you're putting the responsibility on another country. It has an appalling human rights record. It ranks with 22 points out of 100, for instance, on Freedom House's index on political freedoms, which puts it in about the same space as Russia, for instance.
Health officials are warning against eating 3 types of Kinder chocolate this Easter weekend, as they've been linked to a salmonella outbreak in Belgium. The European Food Safety Authority says it matched the same strain of bacteria to one taken from a factory last December. 70 people have been affected in the UK so far. The UK's Health Security Agency has issued an alert for Kinder Surprise, Kinder Mini Eggs and Kinder Chocobons. 1 in 7 teachers have experienced sexism at work, with 59% citing harassment coming from a pupil. The National Association of Schoolmasters Union of Women Teachers will debate the problem of so-called incel culture in schools at its annual conference in Birmingham. Chair for the Campaign for Real Education, Chris McGovern, told GB News he thinks children need to be held more accountable.
If children cross a line, they know there has to be some sort of punishment, and if necessary, that should be exclusion. No, we can't throw boys onto the scrap heap because they're being misogynist. They've got to be looked after as well. But we do have to protect girls. We have to protect other groups in the school. So really, this is about leadership, and we should throw away some of these liberal ideas about, oh, we're always going to put the child first.
The Duke and Duchess of Sussex will make a televised address at the opening ceremony of the Invictus Games in the Netherlands later. It follows visits on Thursday to meet the Queen and the Prince of Wales in Windsor. Harry and Meghan's arrival at the Games marked the couple's first public appearance together in Europe since they quit as senior working royals more than 2 years ago. Royal commentator Ingrid Seward told GB News it could be the first step in rebuilding their relationship with the royal family.
Whatever you might think of Harry and Meghan, we all rather hope so that the family will embrace them again. But I'm not sure about Prince William. I think that probably goes a bit deeper. And I know that Prince Charles is very hurt, but it's his son. It wasn't like we imagine a sort of long meeting. I would think it was an exchange of pleasantries, because that's the royal way, but with the undertone of mending bridges.
Ingrid Seward ending our report. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Real Britain with Darren Grimes.
Welcome to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Thank you very much for your company. Here's what's coming up on the show today. The National Education Union has said that we need to teach Black history and social justice in the school curriculum. Do we have a problem with teaching children to be inclusive? We'll get to the bottom of that before 3 p.m. Also, we'll talk about what the best way is to give women's football the boost that it deserves. With the women's UEFA Euros taking place in July, I think now is the time to actually get behind women and that form of football. Scotland is set to become the first part of the UK to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to stand for election. Under the plans, young people can become MSPs at the next Scottish Parliament election in 2026. But is 16 too young? I know what I think. That's what we're talking about for the next hour. I'd love to know your thoughts, much more important than mine. Get involved and tell me what you think about making our school curriculum more diverse. Do children need to be taught Black history and social justice? You can tweet me at GB News, or you can email me on gbviews@gbnews.co.uk. You can watch us online on YouTube, and don't forget about Facebook. You'll find lots of brilliant content on the GB News page. Cheers very much. Now, folks, I'm about to say something that'll go down like a bag of sick with the Twitterati. It might not be popular, it might even be boring in some quarters, but I think it needs to be said. This is my ode to oil. The oil and gas industry in Britain is one of our nation's most important, if you ask me. It supplies energy to power enterprise. It heats our homes. It makes sure that you can get to work. It allows aeroplanes to transport our everyday goods and, of course, people to and from our nation. If you're holding your telly remote right now, its plastic is oil. The fertiliser used to produce the food you eat is oil. The detergent you're using to do your washing is oil. The paint you've just used to do up the house is oil. The potentially life-saving medicine you're taking each day is oil. That's why it's absolutely baffling to me that hardly anybody seems to be criticising the Extinction Rebellion love child, Just Stop Oil, on what they're doing and what they're actually calling for. The extreme green activists clashed with lorry drivers yesterday as protesters blocked oil terminals and hauled themselves on top of tankers in planned Easter demonstrations to thwart oil transportation. Now, folks, a driver in Essex was pictured yanking one of them from his vehicle. Someone just trying to make a living, going about his day-to-day life. And given how vital oil is, especially during a severe cost of living crisis, I can understand this bloke's frustration. It's also common sense to suggest it's not safe to have randoms treating an oil tanker like it's a kid's climbing frame. And I certainly, I don't condone physical violence, but this driver may well have prevented some form of disaster here. Who knows, folks, right? You'll have to be Mystic Meg. What I do know, though, and what you don't, I think, have to be a clairvoyant to understand, and what is utterly baffling, frankly, is how anyone can defend people who attack somebody like this man for actually seeking to counter and stop these activists that want to dismantle capitalism and the structures of the state. They're activists, right? They parrot lines on how we're looking at the end of life on Earth. Well, I'm sorry, but ask yourself this. Ask yourself, if you genuinely believed that the world was about to end in either a ball of flames or by drowning every single one of its inhabitants, and that it was too late for humanity to act, would you honestly spend your final days gluing your behind to the middle of a road? And ask yourself how they get away with it. Some are arrested time and again. Remember the scenes in the past during anti-lockdown protests, for example. The police always cleared them without a second thought. Woke causes get a free pass in modern Britain. And these people say, we just want to be listened to. They cry, that's their rallying cry, these bratish climate activists. And I say, listen to. Our energy bills are spiralling out of control, but our government hasn't wavered from its net zero zealotry. If anything, they need to be listened to a lot less to protect British pay packets in a country, let's not forget, that emits less than 1% of global CO2 emissions. In what way can you honestly argue that these people have been ignored? I agree with the former Brexit Secretary, Lord Frost, who said that the government is on a plan where it's not engaging with the trade-offs. It won't be possible, he says, to deliver net zero on the timetable they want, and we will end up with rationing and behavioural change. Pretty damning, if you ask me. And that's the oil-free future that I think these activists actually want. And I, folks, I for one, until there's an alternative, Hope to Almighty God that they fail. Another topic that caught my eye this week was the National Education Union saying that schools should teach social justice and black history across the whole UK national curriculum. In doing so, they say it would stop incidents like the one with Child Q, the black schoolgirl who was wrongly strip-searched earlier this year, from happening again. So do we need a more diverse curriculum? Here to discuss this issue, I'm joined by social policy analyst Dr. Rahib Ehsan and Elliot Reid, the founder of blackhistory.school. Rahib, thank you for your company. Do we need a more diverse curriculum? Is this going to stop incidents like Child Q, for example, from actually happening?
I think that in modern day Britain it's very important that our schools act as intergroup hubs of cultural exchange. I think that is very important. But ultimately, when it comes to British education, I want to see more of a focus on hard skills. I think that our maths, literacy, and all the rest of it, I think we need to focus on improving those standards. Now, of course, you want schools to be hubs of inclusive learning, and you want students to be able to develop their knowledge in a safe manner. My issue is more that I don't want what I would consider to be contested theories to be presented as fact in our classrooms. And we have seen politicians suggest that is taking place in schools within England in particular. So I think that the discussion is, how do we create schools which ultimately helped pupils from different backgrounds develop those bonds of social trust and mutual respect without presenting theories as fact, which could potentially be divisive within those schools.
Elliot, you've heard what Rakib had to say there. In my view, right, there should be no such thing as LGBT history, black history or women's history on the curriculum. To me, and I'm sure to many viewers watching, there is one thing and one thing only, and that's British and world history, right? That's there for all of us, no matter what our skin colour or sexuality, and we should teach that, should we not?
I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding of the argument of what's being put forward. As you said, black history is British history. When we look at the ethnic makeup of the UK, 75% of those ethnic minorities are from the descendants of British subjects. Now, I've done a little bit of my own research and I've looked at the past papers that have been presented by AQA and Edexcel, and despite the national curriculum stating that it is important to understand the individuals and the makeup of individuals who have created life in Britain as we know it, despite them saying it's important to teach that, there's absolutely no concrete matter in teaching children as to how the descendants of British subjects have created Britain as we know it today. And that's an issue, because when it comes to children's psychology, it's been documented ever since the early psychologists such as Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, Joseph Campbell, that children or people need a hero story to step into. They need to be able to see the reflection of themselves in the development of society. It's very, very difficult to talk about an empire which ruled 25% of the Earth's people and not mention India, Jamaica, Hong Kong, the Americas to another degree. It's children are being robbed of a much better education which explores economic contributions, ethical, moral contributions which have created Britain as we know it today. So yes, 100% black history should be taught.
Right, I've heard what you've got to say. Elliot, do you not agree with Rakib, though, that actually the curriculum is swelling like you wouldn't believe, right? When actually kids need to be taught the basic things, right? They're leaving school without proficient English and the math skills that they need to go out there into the workplace. Are you worried that we're piling too much on to the curriculum?
No, because they teach history anyway, so you just fit it into the history curriculum. You're not talking about adding another subject. You're just talking about fitting it into the existing curriculum.
The NEU aren't the only union to actually ask for this, though. Earlier this month, the National Association of Schoolmasters Union of Women Teachers said they want to decolonise the classroom and teach pupils about black people's contribution to Britain in all its subjects, from maths to even food technology. I mean, to me, Rakib, this is all just going a bit mental, right? And we heard from the likes of Miriam Cates MP saying that actually kids are being told that they can transition behind their parents' backs. And I imagine most viewers watching this are just saying, just get this activism out of schools. Yes, teach British history, and I agree with much of what Elliot had to say there, but all of this stuff added on to the curriculum, it's just too much.
I think one point that I do agree with Elliot, and I think this is actually a way that you can boost social cohesion in modern day Britain. Take, for example, how we teach the Second World War. I think there's definitely more space to discuss the contribution made by Asian, African and Caribbean soldiers towards the broader Allied effort to defeat Nazism. And I think that's something that shouldn't only be taught in inner city schools. I think that should be taught in schools across Britain, whether it's rural villages or inner city London or Birmingham. I think that the point I'd make to Elliot is that something has to give, and ultimately there has to be a broader discussion in terms of what should be prioritised in our curriculum. And I think that's something that we should have that conversation. I think things like the proposal that I've just provided, I don't want to see people, the sort of anti-war activists say, oh, this is too militaristic. I think it's important that Britain acknowledges the contribution made by members of the British Indian Army, soldiers from the Caribbean, the East African Rifles. I think those contributions, we should talk about them a lot more. And I think also it should be taught within our history lessons in schools. But we have to be aware of the risk of social activism. The main point that I would make is that we cannot compromise the development of hard skills, which will ultimately provide children with the basics as they enter adulthood and further down the line, the labour market.
Elliot?
You'd like me to comment on what you said, Darren?
I would like you to comment on what Rakib's just said, if that's okay.
I'd agree with Rakib. But once again, you're not going to detract from hard skills by just filling the history curriculum with more useful information and more useful content. The national curriculum, on the national curriculum website, they have already expressed the need for children to learn about empire and for children to learn about the multi-ethnic or multi-group contributions to the UK. The issue is that because, say, examining boards like EdXL, AQA, which the teachers already incredibly stressed, by the way, at least I think 30% of teachers want to currently leave the industry because of the amount of stress. So they need content which they are going to be able to seamlessly teach the children to satisfy the exam boards, and the exam boards also need to satisfy the national curriculum. On my research, I looked through about 100 past papers for GCSE history, and there was only one question out of 100 past papers which alluded to empire, and even that was pretty borderline propagandish. It didn't really satisfy anything from a true historical objective nature.
Right, but Elliot, you were shaking your head when I mentioned getting activism out of schools. Why do you disagree with that sentiment?
No, I wasn't. There was a lot that I was shaking my head at, Darren. I think it's just that you were trying to put a lot into one sentence, and you tried to put Black history with LGBTQ history with women's rights, and I think in your mind you see it as...
I do view it as separate identity boxes, trying to get as much into the curriculum as possible, when actually just teach British history. That's all I'm asking for, Elliot.
Okay, well, we agree on that, but then you have to also understand that, Darren, there have been gay people, Black people, Indian people who are also contributed to British history. It's
right,
all
absolutely.
British history.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Rakib, you can come in there.
I think that we have to, maintain focus on what we're actually discussing. For example, I think there's no place for radical transgenderism in British schools. That's something that I'm totally against. I think the discussion we're having is about what is the current content and substance of our curriculum, and how can our curriculum actually provide a more wholesome educational experience, which also helps to boost social cohesion in modern day Britain. And I think that's certainly achievable. But I draw the line, for example, if we have critical race theories being presented as fact, ultimately presenting non-white Brits as some kind of oppressed collective in British society. I actually think that would be incredibly demotivating for some ethnic minority peoples in Britain. I think what's much better is, and Elliot will probably agree with me on this, for example, the Black Caribbean contribution to post-World War to reconstruction in the UK. I think that's something that could be factored into our history lessons.
Right, men, we're going to have to leave it there. I could continue this debate and go on for hours, no doubt, but that was the social policy analyst, Dr. Rakib Ehsan, and Elliot Reid, founder of Black History School. Thanks for speaking to me on Real Britain today. There's plenty more to come, though, this afternoon. Next, we'll be going back to basics. This afternoon, we'll be looking at buy to let. It's making a comeback, folks. But first, let's have a look at the weather.
Approaches from the northwest. Let's take a look at the details. The southwest of England will be mostly dry with plenty of warm, prolonged sunny spells on offer. However, cloud and coastal mist may persist in the far west this afternoon. Similar to yesterday, the southeast of England will be fine, dry and sunny this Saturday afternoon, and with light winds it will feel warm once again. South Wales will be dry and sunny and feel a little warmer than yesterday. However, some cloud and coastal mist may persist for Pembrokeshire. The Midlands may have a little fair weather cloud, but otherwise it'll also be dry with plenty of sunny spells. It'll also feel a little bit warmer than yesterday for most. It will be mostly warm, dry and sunny for the northeast of England too this afternoon, although a rather fresh onshore breeze will keep the temperatures a little cooler along the coast. Southern Scotland will have some patchy cloud this afternoon, but there will be plenty of bright or sunny spells. It'll be dry and feel warm in the sunshine. Northern Ireland will be dry but turn increasingly cloudy through the afternoon as a band of rain slowly approaches from the west. The cloud will keep the temperatures a little bit cooler. Overnight it will remain dry with clear spells for many, but rain will slowly edge into the northwest of Scotland and Northern Ireland, and that's how it's shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Coming up tomorrow at 6 p.m.
Welcome to a very special GB News Easter programme. We are invited during this short time to enter into the passion, death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. It's an invitation to take part in the most important part of the Christian life. Happy Easter. Alleluia.
The Meaning of Easter with Calvin Robinson tomorrow at 6 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Cheers very much for your company. Now, folks, new data suggests that many landlords still view buy-to-let as a good investment, and it's having quite the bounce back. Landlords bought more homes than they sold in the first 3 months of 2022, according to the estate agent Hamptons. But what is buy-to-let and what are the benefits? Well, I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Russell Quirk, who is the property expert, and he joins me to offer his pearls of wisdom. Hello, my friend. Can we start by just setting out in layman's terms, what actually is buy-to-let?
So buy-to-let is where someone, anybody, either an individual or actually increasingly institutions, will purchase residential properties with a view to renting them out to tenants. And it's as you've alluded to, really, a very, very popular way of investing in assets. So as an alternative, if you like, to the stock market or other such assets. So for years and years, people have, I guess, they rather kind of alluded to or adhered to the mantra of safe as houses, which is that bricks and mortar generally over a long period of time is very, very safe in investment terms. The big benefit of buy-to-let, as in residential property investment, is that the person that owns that property not only gets an appreciation in terms of the asset value going up, so typically over the long term about 4 to 5% capital appreciation, so that the value of that residential property may go up by roughly 4 to 5% typically per annum. But obviously you also make a profit by way of the rental. So typically the yield, and what the yield is the kind of percentage of the asset price that you attain on an annual basis in rental terms. So a typical yield in the UK is about 3 to 4%. So you get a return on your money based on the fact that you're getting a rental every month, therefore every year, but also the value of that asset going up. So typically, on average, Darren, someone, again, in the long term, and property, I have to say, is not a short-term thing. You go into it with a long-term horizon, really. You're going to see, on average, maybe 7, 8, maybe even a 10% return.
Wow.
And if on an annual basis. Now, the reason, as you said in your preamble, the reason that landlords have kind of piled back into the property market, and that's a combination of new landlords, but also existing landlords increasing their portfolio, is because rents during the pandemic, so over the last 2 years, have increased substantially. So that the latest numbers are that rental values are up about 8 to 9% per annum recently, which means that as a landlord, as an investor, your investment is achieving a greater return now.
So it's good news for people that are making these investments. But Russell, it's not good news for people that are stuck in the rental market, though, is it?
Well, look, actually, the rental market now is, although it's smaller than the owner-occupier market, so typically the amount of households in the UK that are owned by its occupiers, so with a mortgage or without, is about 60, 61%. But that actually is reduced over the last few years from late 60s, 67, 68% of homeowners being owners. So actually the rental market is increasing. Rental, of course, is more attractive than buying to some because you don't have to worry about fluctuating mortgage rates and interest rates. You don't pay stamp duty on the purchase, which is a real big barrier to purchase right now. And it's more accessible. You can get into a property much quicker as a tenant, as opposed to being a buyer that has to go through the legal conveyancing process. But yes, rents have increased, and therefore that's not so good for tenants. And you can say the same of the sales market. Property values are up. Latest numbers I discussed with Liam Halligan actually this week on your channel. Property values are up about 13% year on year. So of course that's now a higher mountain to climb for would-be purchasers too. But look, all as a consequence of inflation. But then I suppose the counter, though, Darren, is that wage growth is up there, to counter that. in the order of 7 to 8% per annum too. So it's not all bad news for tenants and purchasers.
I imagine there's a fair few, though, especially in the public sector, whose wages aren't quite keeping up with those property aspirations. But Russell Quirk, thank you very much for your time and getting to the bottom of that for us today. Next, folks, we'll be discussing women's football. The Women's Euros kicks off in July. But how do we give the game a boost to bring it closer to the men's? Now it's time for a check on the news headlines with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Darren. It's 2:32. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister, Foreign Secretary and Defence Secretary have been banned from entering Russia. The country's Foreign Ministry announced that Boris Johnson, Liz Truss and Ben Wallace are all barred, along with 10 other British government members and politicians. They say hostile sanctions against senior Russian officials is the reason behind the move. Fresh Russian missile strikes have hit the outskirts of the Ukrainian capital Kyiv, and explosions have been heard in the western city of Lviv. Ukrainian defense officials also say fighting is continuing in the southern besieged city of Mariupol. It comes as the country's president, Volodymyr Zelensky, says around 3,000 of his troops have been killed since the beginning of Russia's invasion. The Home Secretary says other countries could follow the UK's Rwanda asylum plan, as it was confirmed that 6,000 people have crossed the channel so far this year. Priti Patel made the comment despite reports of a civil service backlash over the reforms. There's also been warnings from the United Nations Refugee Agency that the plans breach international law. Health officials are warning against eating 3 types of Kinder chocolate this Easter weekend, as they've been linked to a salmonella outbreak in Belgium. 70 people have been affected in the UK so far. The UK Health Security Agency has issued an alert for Kinder Surprise, Kinder Mini Eggs and Kinder Choco Bons. On TV, online and on DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Now let's get back to Darren Grimes after this short break.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello folks, welcome back to Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Now, the UEFA Women's 22 tournament gets underway on July 6th. The opening match takes place between England and Austria at Old Trafford. UEFA have announced that over 350,000 tickets for the tournament have already been sold. So is now the time to really focus on the women's game and give it a boost for a change? Well, joining me to discuss, I'm delighted to say, is Janie Frampton, a former referee for the men's professional game. Janie, just on the Euros later this year, they are actually set, we know already, to break attendance records, already selling more tickets than the 2017 run. What do you reckon actually explains this surge in popularity?
Thank you. Good afternoon. I do believe this surge in popularity is in some of the countries, you know, we're talking about particularly Asia, America, and in Europe now, they're promoting women's football a huge amount. And that means there was almost like a chicken and egg situation that needed to happen. And that was, you needed money invested into women's football before women's football became far more publicised on TV and radio and the coverage. Now, that seems to have happened. A lot of sponsorship has come in, and it seems that that has now promoted the women's game, which has then encouraged broadcasters to put it on mainstream channels, which has grown participation for sure.
And do you think the game being showcast more by broadcasters has something to do with it?
Yes, of course. You know, and I get asked all the time, you know, so what's women's football about? And I say, well, do you know what? Watch it and then come back to me with that question. But until people have watched it and they realise just how technical it is, and we've also got now this whole point where they need to stop comparing women's football to men's football because they're two different games. And you've got to value and respect each of those games on their own merits.
Yes, well, interestingly, it's interesting that you say that, because one thing, and I imagine it must frustrate you, people will say that women just aren't as skillful as the men and therefore it's not as interesting a game. Now, as a former referee of the men's game, how big is the gap in the quality of playing?
There's no gap. There's no gap. They're two different games. I used to always say that refereeing women's football was my passion. Refereeing the men's game was my challenge. Now, when you look at the two different games, you look at the physiology of men. They're bigger, stronger, they have more stamina than women, and that's research can back that up every single day of the week. But the women are actually more technical because they don't have the same strength and stamina as men. They rely on their skill and their tactics, so they play far more ball to feet. So it's far more tactical instead of playing long balls in the air.
Yeah, you know, I was watching the Scotland game, women's football, and Erin Cuthbert, who also plays for Scotland, and she plays for Chelsea as well. A real story, a success story, and a success story of not just football, but of the union of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Do you think people like Erin are given enough chance? Because are there enough academies and coaches out there for the women's game? Are they able to actually bring in talented women and say, you know, you've got it, we'll get you somewhere?
You know what? That's a really good question. And we could break that down even further. That do we have enough women role models as coaches? That is really paramount. Do we have enough male coaches that understand the needs of the women's game? And I say all the time, please don't tell me what we need as women until you've walked in our shoes or at least asked us what we need. So I think the answer to that is we need certainly to develop our women coaches. We've got great numbers that are out there now about the amount of women coaches we have, but we really need to look at far more in high-profile jobs and make it worthwhile for these women to take these high-profile jobs. Not offer them an amount of money that is nowhere near matching, not the equivalent to men, but something that is respectful to the role. And that is still not happening. There's still not enough money in the women's game to make that happen.
When you get comments from the Northern Ireland manager, for example, Kenny Shields, saying that girls and women are more emotional than men, so they take a goal going in not very well, you know, you get sort of, I guess, the caricature in my head is a woman getting a handbag out, which of course doesn't happen at all. What do you think when you hear remarks like this?
You know, that is firstly very disrespectful. Secondly, totally naive. And thirdly, I think he needs a lesson in emotional intelligence, because the research will show really clearly that women have a higher level of emotional intelligence because they understand the emotions all the way around of different situations, different people, and then they know how to behave and how to manage those situations. Now, that's research that can back that up. That's not me just talking to you. So yes, we are more emotional, but we also know how to use those emotions.
Yeah, a big question, of course, but what do you think actually needs to ultimately be done? I mean, we've sort of touched on it, but still, we've just heard an example there of the people being a little bit reluctant, perhaps, to, one, even let women play, never mind watch women playing football. How do you think you get past those, I guess you would call them stigmas?
Yeah, and you know what, Darren, we're still a long way behind. We've come a long, long way, and I will never, ever put that down, because the growth in participation has been huge. We still need to see a growth in refereeing and coaching. We still need to see a growth in sponsors sponsoring women's football. More than anything, we need to see more women decision makers, because we still have so many men that are decision makers at the top end of our game that's not going to change anything until we get women involved in those decisions who can then give a balanced view of what it is that we need in the women's game to get it growing further.
Yeah, Janie Frampton, I don't know if you've seen, but the Prime Minister caused a bit of controversy recently when he was asked about participation in female sports of trans women, so biological men. Is that something that you've paid attention to? Are you concerned by this current trend and the argument over whether or not trans women should be able to participate in female sports?
It's a real tricky one. And I think the answer to that is every sport has to be dealt with differently, because you've got to look at the physiology involved in every sport. And I don't think there is a good answer, result. There's not a right or wrong. But I do think every sport now needs to look at this quite clearly to create a very fair playing field for both men and women and trans, so that you don't discriminate against the existing women who are participating. And I did a lot of work around the Caster Semenya case, and I researched a lot about the comments made by Martina Navratilova and about from Paula Radcliffe. And I understood their points, but actually this is really complicated, and every sport has to get this right. And there's no point our Prime Minister or anybody else coming out with flippant comments, because that's not going to solve anything. In fact, it ends up having a negative trend. I would like to see every single sport address this thoroughly to make sure there's a fair playing field for all.
I couldn't agree with you more, because I think ultimately we cannot get in a position where we're celebrating the success of women's sport only to create a very unequal playing field when it comes to actually the playing of women's sports. But Janie, to end, I wonder, answer me this, and I guess the answer will be an emphatic yes, but I assume you'll be supporting the Lionesses come July, right?
Oh my goodness, 100%. But I will also be supporting women involved in football per se, because hopefully we'll have some women officials at the Euros. I will support women coaches and managers, because I want to see the rise and the profile of women in football per se.
Janie Frampton, thank you very much for your time today. Have a nice day. The sunshine looks amazing. It's now 2:46 and it's time for Scrap, Reform or Keep. And today we're going to delve into the land and building transaction tax. It's a tax charged by the government in Scotland when you buy a home of more than £145,000. Here to discuss this is Dr. John Boyle. He's the Director of Research and Strategy at Retty & Co. They're an independent property firm. Now, this land and buildings transaction tax, John, what actually is it in layman's terms?
So it's the Scottish equivalent of stamp duty. So it's the transaction tax that is paid on purchase of residential or non-residential property or land in Scotland, and it's now property taxes are devolved, and it was introduced in Scotland at the start of the 2015-16 financial year.
More progressive than stamp duty. How does it differ?
It differs because the bandings are different. So in Scotland, you don't pay anything, as I think you said, up to 145,000. It's then 2% at 145,000 to 150,000, 5% at 250 to 325, 10% at 325 to 750, and then 12% when you're over 750. In England, the bands are slightly different. So, you don't pay anything up to 125, then it's 2% 125 to 250, 5% 250 to 925, and then 10% 95 to 1.5 million. And the 12% only kicks in at over 1.5 million. So, yes, it's called more progressive because those buying the larger properties tend to pay more in terms of LBTT. But in Scotland, you pay less on equivalent property sale under 333,000. It tends to amount to a few £100 maximum. Right. But then it begins to ratchet up. Once you get above 333,000, because you're paying the 10% at 325 plus, and then the 12% at 750 plus, once you get up to 400,000, you're paying 13,350, which is as opposed to 10,000 down south. Once you get to 500,000, you're paying 23,350, as opposed to 15,000.
Well, I mean, speaking of down
once
south,
you're paying over 78,000.
Much of the national conversation, and it certainly extends to Scotland as well. I know places like Edinburgh, for example, are struggling from high rents. But if you consider first-time buyers, does this more progressive form of taxation actually help first-time voters? And I'm wondering if I can get your thoughts on council tax bans as well. Of course, it's been quite a long time, hasn't it, since they were updated. Do you think there needs to be more of a progressive rethink UK-wide about how we actually tax property and wealth and all of these other things?
Yes, absolutely. And, the problem, I think, with LBTT as well as with stamp duty, it's a transaction on trade. It's a tax on trade. It's not a tax on value of properties. And there is a bit of a kicker for first-time buyers in Scotland because they've got a nil band up to 175,000. So in effect, they save about an extra £600 against another purchaser buying a property at a similar price. But yeah, there hasn't been a re-evaluation of property for a very long time, north or south of the border. There have been investigations, including recently by the Scottish Government, into changing property tax up here, but
right. I mean, it always seems like every 2 minutes there's an investigation or something or other. Yeah. But Dr. John Boyle, then, I wonder, are you saying you would scrap? Are you going for reform? Or are you saying keep of the land and buildings transaction tax?
I don't think there's a hope in hell that they're going to scrap it because it raises a lot of revenue. It's very easy to administer and it's easy to collect, and you can't avoid taxes on property. But reforming it is certainly something that we have advocated in the past, particularly looking at the banding changes to try and stimulate activity, particularly in the kind of the middle reaches of the market, which tends to pay the greatest level of the tax, but also looking at reducing it or limiting it for downsizers to enable a better allocation of properties.
Elderly and people like that. It makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, to be honest with you, I think we should just put you in charge, Dr. John Boyle, in the whole thing and sort it all out, because it needs root and branch reform. But thank you very much for your time today on Real Britain. Now, folks, under plans from the Scottish National Party, we're staying with Scotland for a second, Scotland is to become the first part of the UK that allows 16-year-olds to run as members of the Scottish Parliament in the 2026 election. So in our campus clash today, I'm asking, should we be allowing people as young as 16 to run for Parliament? Because to me, folks, I'll just set out my stall, surely they're still bairns at that age, if I use a Scottish and North East term. Anna McGovern joins me now, an English student from Queen Mary University of London, and Ella Carmichael, a politics student from Durham University. Ella, are you a fan of this? Are you saying, look, let's enfranchise 16-year-olds, let's get them involved, put them in Parliament, it'll be fine and dandy?
Well, I think that the argument kind of is fundamentally why not? I mean, it's a very similar angle to, as we were saying, votes at 16. And I think that there is no secret that the UK has had a big, crisis of participation in the political process, especially in young people. And I think that people aged 16 to 18 can feel really disconnected from the democratic process. And I think that making a move such as this could be really beneficial to youth engagement in politics and in the political system. And I think that it's not that we're necessarily saying that the House would end up being full of 16-year-olds, but I think why not give them the chance and why not let people decide if that's who they want to represent them?
Anna, I would tell you what I was up to at the age of 16, but I'm not sure that my mother watching this would approve. But Anna, are you not just against young people? Are you not just, I don't know, assuming the worst of young people? Wouldn't they actually add their voice to the democratic debate within the parliamentary system?
Absolutely not. I'm not against young people. I'm actually a really huge advocate for youth social action and young people having a say on the decision-making table. And I have to say, Darren, that I do agree with you. Young people being in Parliament and standing as MPs as young as 16, when they're not even able to vote, they're not even able to buy alcohol or drive or any of those things. I think that is a ludicrous notion. However, there are many other ways that 16-year-olds can have a say. There is the UK Youth Parliament, where young people from 11 to 18 can stand as an elected official representing young people in their constituency on a national level, promoting campaigns and standing for issues that young people care about most. So they can get involved in that way, and they can also get involved in many other ways through charitable organisations and local activism as well. So I don't think it's necessarily about having young people as MPs, because it is a very difficult job, and I think it's something that comes with life experience that you should bring forward to the table. However, that doesn't mean to say that we can't look at other ways that young people can have a say and get involved.
Ella, I'm wondering, do you feel as a young person that you just don't have a voice in the democratic debate at all? If we consider, I think only, apart from the climate change, I don't know what your view is on that, but I'm assuming you're with that lot climbing on top of lorries and all the rest of it. But Ella, do you feel that you don't have a voice in the national debate, essentially?
I think for someone who is more engaged with politics as a young person, I don't necessarily feel like that. But I think that I did more so when I was 16 or 17. And especially if you are a young person that is interested in the political process. So I think that we all know that representation through youth parliament and stuff, it isn't the same as being involved in the national process. OK, so Anna, then, just in a sentence, if you would, please, do you actually think the Conservative government are actually representing young people like you? Are the SNP not right?
I would say the current Conservative Party, as it stands, is representing anyone really with the policies that they've been bringing in. But I wouldn't agree with the SNP with bringing forward 16-year-olds.
Well, there we are.
MPs.
We'll have to leave it there. Anna McGovern and Ella Carmichael, thank you very much for your time. Now, folks, yous have been watching Real Britain with me, Darren Grimes. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Enjoy the sunshine. I'll see you back here tomorrow at 2. Here's the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking fine and dry with plenty of warm sunshine, but rain is approaching from the northwest. Let's take a look at the details. The southwest of England will be mostly dry with plenty of warm, prolonged sunny spells on offer. However, cloud and coastal mist may persist in the far west this afternoon. Similar to yesterday, the southeast of England will be fine, dry and sunny this Saturday afternoon, and with light winds it will feel warm once again. South Wales will be dry and sunny and feel a little bit warmer than yesterday. However, some cloud and coastal mist may persist for Pembrokeshire. The Midlands may have a little fair weather cloud, but otherwise it'll also be dry with plenty of sunny spells. It'll also feel a little bit warmer than yesterday for most. It will be mostly warm, dry and sunny for the northeast of England too this afternoon, although a rather fresh onshore breeze will keep the temperatures a little bit cooler along the coast. Southern Scotland will have some patchy cloud this afternoon, but there will also be plenty of bright or sunny spells. It will be dry and feel warm in the sunshine. Northern Ireland will be dry too, but turn increasingly cloudy through the afternoon as a band of rain slowly approaches from the west. The cloud will keep the temperatures a little bit cooler. Overnight, it will remain dry with clear spells for many, but rain will slowly edge into the northwest of Scotland and Northern Ireland, and that's how the weather is shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Coming up tomorrow at 6 p.m.
Welcome to a very special GB News Easter programme. We are invited during this short time to enter into the passion, death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. It's an invitation to take part in the most important part of the Christian life. Happy Easter. Alleluia.
The Meaning of Easter with Calvin Robinson tomorrow at 6 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I'd love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I